I called Linus and I said, Linus, you have a lot of attention on you right now. You may not know it, but you are viral. And I think he did know it at that point. And so I said, Linus, make the contract address of the token in your bio. Like basically in your Twitter bio, just say like, support Metformin research here. Here's the token address. Okay. He did that. And all of a sudden, the token went up 40 times. 40 times. Okay. From a market cap of about $10,000 to $430,000, right? In the span of 2 hours. Okay. So this shows how much energy there is in this crypto world to predict attention. And we can channel that attention to funding longevity research.
In this episode of Levity, we're looking at how decentralized science and crypto might actually change what gets tested and funded in longevity. We sit down with Pump Science founder Benji Leibowitz to talk about turning aging experiments into something you can follow and support in real time, using tokens, on-chain data, and a bit of gamification. This episode is actually part of a new collaboration with Pump Science. So, why are we doing this? Well, the idea is simple. We want to make DeSci itself less mysterious. What it is, how it works in practice, and how you might become a part of it. For now, this collaboration lives mainly in the Levity newsletter. Over time, we may also turn this into a dedicated YouTube format. In any case, the first piece from the partnership is already live, and you'll find all current and future Pump Science articles collected at reachlevity.com/DeSci. Check for the link in the description below and make sure to subscribe to the newsletter so you don't miss out on any content going forward. In this episode, you'll also hear Linus Petersson, founder of the Swedish Longevity Cluster, join us partway through. His intervention on Pump Science became one of the most talked about experiments on the platform, so we wanted his perspective from inside the project. As you'll notice later, we brought him into this recording on the fly, which is why his introduction may feel a bit improvised. And with that, I bring you Benji Leibowitz and, a little later in the episode, Linus Petersson. Benji Leibowitz is one of the key figures in the emerging decentralized science movement. He has worked across academic research, biotech R&D, and crypto infrastructure, and helped build Molecule and several of the first major science DAOs. Today, he's the founder and project lead of Pump Science, the platform turning longevity experiments into something people can follow in real time. His work sits at the intersection of biology, funding, innovation, and new coordination technology. And he has become a central voice in how DeSci might accelerate progress in aging research, which is really, really exciting. And welcome, Benji, so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get into this. And yeah, please take it from here wherever you'd like, but this will be a super fun conversation.
I think I'll actually start with something I'm really, really excited about, and that is actually that Pump Science is going to partner with Levity, and I'd like to think of it as an editorial partnership. So you'll bring content to our newsletter, which you can find at reachlevity.com, and we might also do a really, really fun YouTube format, which we can talk about at a later point. I think we still have to iron some details out, but we do know that you're going to bring content to the newsletter to start with. So that's really, really exciting, and we're trying to build a bridge between people who are maybe scientists or investors or just curious about longevity, and people who are in crypto and DeSci, and try to get those two worlds together more, because and we're going to talk about that a lot today, of course, how to do that and what DeSci is and so on. But I think that for Levity this is perfect, and one of the things that we want to do is to solve aging as fast as possible, right? And we have to try all the different avenues that's out there. And what DeSci is doing right now is really, really exciting. So yeah, so happy to have you on board.
Oh no, it'll be amazing. And yeah, I think if you'd like, we can kind of get into the kind of idea behind the partnership. But maybe this will get into a little bit of like what DeSci is all about. But I'm sure much of your audience is very interested in getting involved in longevity, right? And they're already kind of self-experimenting on themselves, trying out different things, reading different articles. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult for them to kind of participate in the arena that is like the frontier of understanding, right? So, there are many longevity biotech companies or scientists, et cetera, or investors. But as a normal person, it's very difficult to get involved, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what we can do is get people involved to, be part of the game, right? So they can trade in the different compounds they think are promising. They can submit ideas that they have. They can directly be scientists themselves without, very much effort. They can be spectators if all they want to do is just, watch the results come out. If it's, because, at the end of the day, like, some people like sports, but to some people, like longevity is the sport, right? That they want to follow. But there really is no one, there's no teams, there's no one keeping score, there's no referee, right? Like there's no organized game around longevity, right? Besides like this amorphous, nebulous entity we call science, right? And so I think a lot of what this is about is like bringing people in, formalizing it, and enabling basically anybody to get involved in what we all care about, which is, lifespan extension.
Yeah, and we'll talk much more about that. Maybe first of all, we should introduce you. What's your background, and how did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's definitely been a windy path here. I would say like the original interest as a kid growing up was in superheroes. So just loved the idea of just like superhuman powers. I don't know why. Was just definitely drawn to that. And
Any
so
special superheroes?
all of them. So when I was very young, when I was about like 8 years old, I could lucid dream, and that was such an incredible experience. Could literally control the dreams and could be whichever superhero I want. And so I would mostly be Superman just because flying around is probably the coolest, but I would also be Spider-Man as well. It was really fun to like go through the cities and yeah, just like, shoot webs and, swing and fly through this. Like it was so fun.
So you actually
It's
had a superpower,
in
and
my dreams, yes. I mean, with
yeah,
lucid
but
dreams, you can really
lucid
control
dream
it.
is sort of a superpower, you could say.
You can conjure up your own worlds. I
Yeah.
think it was the coolest thing ever. I unfortunately lost the ability growing up, but there was a brief period there for like a year or two where I could totally control the dreams. It was unbelievable. And so yeah, I was definitely like captivated with the idea of superheroes, and I think was just drawn to a career in developing superhuman powers. And so, really enjoyed computer science, really enjoyed, genetic engineering, and so studied basically synthetic biology, which is like genetic engineering. And yeah, my first job was in the genomic space in oncology. So basically, like we would sequence the tumors, like genetic sequence tumors from cancer patients, and send therapy recommendations to their doctors. I read this paper while I was there when I was like 4 years into it, basically saying that if you cured every single cancer, you would add, I think, 2 or 3 years to the average life expectancy. And that rocked my world. I was like, oh my God, that's like not as much impact as I would like to have. I mean, 2, 3 years is incredible, but I feel like we should be shooting for more than that, in terms of lifespan extension. So that definitely rocked my world. Had always been interested in crypto. I think as soon as I really understood what it was, I was definitely late to the game, too late to like be financially free from it. But as soon as I like sat down and understood the technology, I realized how philosophically it was aligned with, my beliefs. So I'm like, I would say just hardcore libertarian at heart. I just really subscribe to that, economic philosophical thinking. And to me, crypto was kind of like the technological manifestation of that philosophy, which is like you own your own assets. Everyone is free to trade with whomever they like, freedom of expression, freedom of commerce, freedom of speech, privacy. I think all of those ideals were programmed into this whole crypto world, so which we can get into later. But I think starting from the philosophical perspective, I think is super interesting, and that's what attracted me. Um, and I knew that this was going to be powerful for healthcare and biotech because what it really is an incentive engineering technology, right? So, if you want to engineer humans to do certain things, you have to give them incentives, right? And clearly, what you had with crypto was the ability to engineer how the incentives were designed. And so there's a whole academic field in this called mechanism design. It's the intersection between game theory, economics, and psychology. And it's absolutely fascinating. But it's basically the question of how do you get humans to do what like will achieve a certain objective, basically, and coordinate. And I found this super interesting and like realized that so many of the issues with healthcare were around incentives, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's where so much of everything breaks down because you have capitalist systems that are just incentivized for profit maximization. And that's okay. That's just the way the game is set up, but it's not incentivized for lifespan extension. And so you have the healthcare industry, which is making record profits, and lifespans are going down. So there's something clearly wrong with the mechanism design. And so you have to just objectively look at it as an engineering problem. Why are the incentives all broken? And so anyway, I was pretty fascinated by this concept, was looking for projects that we're innovating at this intersection between crypto, but you can just say like, incentive design and healthcare. And there were a ton. And most of them were around personal health data. And so like, how do you keep your health data self-custodial so that it's your asset, you own it, and you can sell it if you want, you can monetize it, it's yours to control. It sounded great in theory, and I do think it is the future, but it clearly did not seem to be the beachhead application of this concept. Um, so after I left the genomics company, I joined a venture capital firm, and we were looking at seed stage biotech companies. And one of the companies that we looked at was a company named Molecule, and they were trying to and they are trying to tokenize biotech intellectual property. And I was really, really fascinated with the idea, but I think what convinced me to, leave my job and go join was just looking at the raw numbers. So, for example, the IP, the intellectual property behind the Humira drug, which is just a Crohn's disease drug, not has nothing to do with longevity. It's just for treating like Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease, was worth $150 billion. If you could tokenize that, meaning assign the value of that patent to a distributed group of people rather than just one singular company. Think about how much value you could put into all of these random people's hands. Like you could put, whatever it is, $1 billion into 150 people's hands, or what's that, whatever. You can run the math, but the idea is there's so much value here in these biotech assets. What if you could democratize that? What if you could put that into everybody's hands and allow patients to create their own medicines and participate in this massive value creation that has thus far just been limited to pharmaceutical companies? So anyway, I think that idea really, really captivated me. So I joined Molecule, and then from being in the DeSci space and just iterating and trying to find product market fit, kind of landed on the idea of Pump Science, and that's where we are today. So anyway, I apologize for the ramble, but hopefully that was useful.
Everyone is allowed to ramble on levity. That's a little bit what we do. But when were you born? I'm thinking you said that you were late to the. No, you said that you were always interested in crypto. And for me, as a 48-year-old, I couldn't have always been interested in crypto because it didn't exist when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, I don't mean always as in, since the beginning of life. I mean always from the moment I really understood it. So when I was in college, I interned at an investment bank.
Yeah.
And for the last week, we got to do whatever we wanted. Like it was 9 weeks of practically hell, and then 1 week of do whatever you want. And so in March of 2017, my friend had kind of mentioned Ethereum to me, and I totally ignored him. I was like, what is this stupid magic internet money that I don't understand? And so I completely threw it, kind of just ignored him. And now he basically doesn't have to work anymore. So anyway, during that summer, of like summer of 2017. Spent that 1 week at that investment bank, truly going deep on Ethereum's technology, smart contract platforms, and distributed ledgers, and really understood what they were. And it was a crazy moment for me to be like, oh my God, this is it. This is like it was like a eureka moment of like, this is, you look at there are moments in life where you see a technology and it's just kind of like mind bending to you. And you're like, I have to figure out how to get involved in this. There's so much potential value here that has not been realized. And it was kind of that moment for me.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we should get into it then. I don't know where to start, but maybe we should start with first explaining it. Since Pump Science is doing decentralized science, maybe we should start there and build from that. What is DeSci, decentralized science?
Yeah, I think we can start with DeSci. I think I think most people know what science is, right? And we can get into the issues of science, of which there are many. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with them. The scientific apparatus is the process of acquiring knowledge that's useful for mankind, right? To try and reduce uncertainty in the world so we can predict the future and, create superpowers for ourselves, basically, right? That's the real use case. Like science is upstream of everything, right? All the products that we have in our world, our ability to communicate right now, there was some scientific discovery that was made that resulted in engineering of a product that was able to take advantage of that scientific knowledge and, create something incredibly valuable, right? So, but there's lots of issues around science. It's very bureaucratized. The funding decisions are, there's huge issues around them. Can get into what they are, but I think one big reason is there's a huge disconnect between the consumer, us, and the actual scientists themselves. Like we have no say in what gets funded, right? So you have this delegated group of people who make decisions for everybody, and you don't know what their incentives are, right? And oftentimes their incentives are they were a scientist and they did a lot of work and they want that work to be important. And so if something makes their work more important, they'll fund it. If it doesn't, if it threatens it, then they'll definitely won't fund it, even if it's potentially transformational. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues with how research gets funded, gets executed, gets published, right? Like we all know, like if anyone knows a grad student, like a PhD scientist, I mean, just start asking them questions, and very quickly you'll see how many issues there are with the scientific world, how much they're underpaid, how difficult it is for them to publish, how difficult it is for them to, get grant funding and, actually pursue the ideas that matter to them. I mean, like the list goes on of the issues, but a lot of it comes from this disconnect between, the scientist and the people who want the science, right? The supply and demand for science, right? That it's just an inefficient market. So I think, that's kind of like the framing of like the issues with science that could be disrupted, right? And so what you realize, it's like, it's actually an incentive problem. Okay, well, now let's look at like the incentive design. It's clearly broken. How would you redesign incentives from the ground up? I think that's what like crypto and DeSci is all about. It's like, let's think about this from first principles. If you could design incentives from ground zero, how would you design them? Right. And then once you've designed them, how do you implement them? And the implementation piece is the crypto component. Right. And so all crypto is money. Right. You can just, and like, what is money? Money is a store of value, meaning it can buy you more things or as many things tomorrow as it can today. Right. It doesn't go down in value. Right. You can't get less for your money tomorrow. That's what happens with our current, like money that we use is the fiat money that are issued by governments is it becomes less and less valuable every single year. They call it inflation and they convince you that it's necessary, but in fact, they're robbing you every single year of your energy, right? And so money's a store of value. Like gold, you can't just like go and extract a ton of it out of nowhere. It takes a lot of effort to create, to get more of it. So that's one component of money, is that it's a good store of value. Another is that it's a good medium of exchange. It's very easy for me to transfer you money. So paper was much better than gold because much lighter, much easier to carry, much easier to hide. It's not as difficult to like carry around these bricks, right? And so that's why they justified using paper rather than, metals. But metals were the original form of money. And then the third is a unit of account. And that just basically means it's divisible. So it's very easy for me to transact with you to pay for one paperclip as much as it is an entire building, right? Like it should be very easy to do either of those transactions. I shouldn't have to get out my knife and a scale and weigh out like one tiny freaking, thin slice of gold versus like 100 gold bars. Like, it's very important that it is easy to transact, right? And this is where having digital money is super easy because computers can do division and multiplication as easily. Like it doesn't matter if the numbers are big or small. It's super easy for computers to do. So I think what one realizes the more they study crypto is that it is a superior form of money than anything we've seen in the past. Metals, seashells have been used, as forms of money. Like you can go look at the history of money. Gold just became like the best because it was the best store of value, etc. But digital money is superior. It is just a far superior technology. It doesn't rob you like governments do with their currency. So everyone's like, oh, I don't trust that system. Who knows who created it, yada yada. But at the same time, it's like you do know that you're being robbed every single year if you hold euros, if you hold Swiss francs, if you hold US dollars. Any of these currencies are just, becoming worthless over time. And you can go look at the charts, like you don't need to take my word for it. But what's cool about crypto is that the scarcity is programmed, right? So it holds its value in its scarcity, and that scarcity is literally written in code and math. And so anyway, you have these two pieces of like, you have this incentive, you have this money engineering system, right? Where you can say, okay, you get this many of this money if you do this, right? So that's kind of what all these smart contract platforms, like if you hear those words, like that's what it means. It's like our society has run on legal contracts of paper, where it's like you do this for me and you get that if this happens, and it's just basically a lot of if-then statements written with words on paper.
Yeah.
What smart contracts are is doing the same thing but with code, right? So it's like true software engineering around money. So like if these conditions are met, then this person gets paid this much. And if those conditions are met, this person gets like it's basically turning the legal system and the banking system into code and math. So, that's often difficult for people to wrap their heads around. What I recommend for anyone who's interested in this is to go and use the technology. So to download a wallet, to purchase some of the tokens, and to mess around with some of the applications that are built on top of it. So, but ultimately what DeSci is trying to do is merge these two issues to use crypto as a potential solution to many of the problems that exist in healthcare and exist in science. So anyway, again, ramble, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. When did this concept originate? I guess first there was Bitcoin, and then you started being able to do smart contracts on Ethereum, and then you started talking about maybe we could, make autonomous organizations. You started building layer upon layer here. So when did DeSci come into the picture?
Yeah, so it definitely didn't start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was just the first one to work. There were a lot of
Yeah,
failed
right.
versions of Bitcoin. People tried. There was like BitGold, um, eCash. I forget all the different iterations. But there were lots of failed attempts to solve a lot of the challenges that Bitcoin solved. Um, but yeah, all Bitcoin could do is just basically send money from one person to another. So it was like, Patrick can send Peter 5 Bitcoins and Peter can send Benji 2 Bitcoins. And it's very important that once Peter has paid Benji all of his Bitcoins, that he can't pay anybody else, the
Yeah,
same Bitcoin,
it took
right?
care of the double spending
The double
problem.
spend problem is
Yeah.
super important. So um, that was essential basically to solve um, for you to be able to make a software around money, right? So people can't steal or create money out of thin air, right? It's the programmable scarcity that was super important to solve that they solved. But that wasn't what you call in computer science as Turing complete. Turing complete is basically it's the I'm sorry, I'm not a computer scientist myself, but as far as I understand, it's the ability to program any arbitrary function. So what that means is you can get as complex as you would like with the code of how to send different people money. So, if Peter is, you know, when he turns 50, then he gets this many tokens if this person is president. Like there's so many, it becomes arbitrarily complex. And that is basically what Turing complete means. And I think like in essence, like don't take my definitions on this one, but it's the idea that you can create more complex systems than just send money from A to B to C, right? Um, it can become very conditional. Um, and that's super important for, basically trying to recreate the legal system in code, right? Because the legal system is all based on if-then statements, right? And
Yeah.
certain conditions. So that was kind of like what Ethereum innovated on. And then there were many more, like these are called layer one blockchains, but it's basically the underlying core protocol um, that people use and transact on and build on top of. But I would say like geez, I don't really know the history behind, who innovated on DeSci first. I know many of the original projects, and I can give you lists and lists of original projects, but many of them were around how do you incentivize doctors to put data on chain, on the blockchain? And how do you take that data and make sure it's encrypted and private and the asset of the patient, right? Whose data it really is. And then how do you take that data and sell it, but in a way that brings value back to the patient and back to the doctor, all in code, right? So there were many of those projects that came and went, frankly. Um, because it is extremely difficult to disrupt care, right? Like actual patient care, the interaction between the physician, the patient, and a digital record, right? An electronic medical record. That is a very, very difficult place to innovate on, especially because this data is so private, it's so sensitive, and it's so valuable, right? So I think those core issues made it extremely difficult to innovate on. But I would say like Molecule was probably the first project to really, catch, right? To really capture the minds of, you know, the formerly crypto world, the biotech world, and and investors as well.
Mm.
And so I would say like it
Yeah,
probably has.
you mentioned molecule a few times now. Maybe we should explain what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Molecule is a project in the DeSci space, definitely one of the original ones. It was started by Paul Kohlhaas and Tyler Galato. And, Paul's a economist, Tyler's a scientist. And their idea was to bring all of this value that's trapped in these pharmaceutical companies and these biotech companies and democratize it and, give that ownership to as many people as possible, ideally the patients, right? Ideally, as a patient who takes a medicine, you own a piece of the medicine that you take, right? That's the fundamental concept. And so all the technology that they've built, and I helped build with them, was around implementing this idea. And so the foundational technology is around this bridge between the digital world and the physical world, and it's all legal. So like legally taking the intellectual property rights, and intellectual property is like patents, right? So most of the value of drugs and supplements, et cetera, is locked into intellectual property in the form of like patents, trademarks, et cetera. The idea was to take those legal rights and assign them to tokens. So you read contracts that basically say, I, as the legal holder of, these patents or patent licenses, et cetera, I want to take those rights and I want to give them to whoever holds these tokens. And so the question is like, why would you do that? Well, it is a new avenue to fundraise for research. So, whereas before, if you wanted to raise funding for research in the private markets, you would have to go and start a company and sell equity, sell shares to just investors. but you can't get the patients involved, right? So the patients don't get any sort of like ownership over what comes out of it. So the idea was if you can assign it to tokens, those tokens you can then sell to patients, and the patients can support the research and then, own a piece of what comes out of it. So that is what I found the concept to be absolutely fascinating. And that's what Molecule has been trying to do, and has, a lot of validation around.
Patrick, I feel like you have 1,000 questions now.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I mean, about crypto. I mean, you can't really engineer scarcity. I mean, scarcity is a function of demand, and people can stop.
No, it's not.
People can stop wanting to play a game. I mean, crypto can
Scarcity
be
is a function of
volatile.
supply.
I mean, no.
Of course it can. But that doesn't, volatility is a function of demand. I would say scarcity is a function of supply. So literally scarce means there's not that much supply, right? It's a supply restricted by definition. Like that is what scarcity is.
Well,
There's
it's
more
relative
people
to the demand. I mean, how
Sure.
much people
Sure,
want
sure,
it. I mean, you
Absolutely.
can't. Nothing is scarce. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It is this relation. It's basically a price finding mechanism, right? I mean, scarcity is just another way of saying like high priced,
Well,
right? But all of this is relative.
It's that the people want more of it than there is.
Correct. So I guess you can have engineered supply. You cannot have pre-engineered demand, right? You can say there can only be 21 million Bitcoin ever created. To me, that's engineered scarcity, regardless of how many people want those coins, right? Do you disagree?
Well, no, I if you want to see it that way, I mean, you say there is a limit to the supply.
That is engineered scarcity, in my opinion, right? Like, you cannot, like, gold, just as an example, is scarce. It's very hard to find. It's very difficult to get out of the ground. It's very unlikely that somebody finds as much gold under the ground tomorrow as, is above ground already, right? It's very difficult. It's just like it's a function of what elements are available on planet Earth, right? But it's this kind of physical scarcity. But there is risk there. What if nobody finds any gold, right? Or somebody finds a massive amount of gold, right? Like what would that do to the price of gold? It would make gold volatile. But yeah, with this engineered scarcity, you can literally create math and codify math that says there will only be this amount released in total, or the supply will increase by this percentage per year, right? Or the amount that's the supply increase will be a function of demand, how many people are willing to buy it, right? So there's lots of ways to design scarcity into the system, into systems, period.
So there can't all of a sudden be like quantitative easing or anything like that. That's
exactly. But that's what backs its value, right? At the end of the day, I think what you're getting at, and what a lot of people realize, is it's just a Ponzi scheme, in the sense that it's a bubble, right? Everyone puts money into it, but like, where's the value? It's digital. Like, where is it, right? It is in the collective belief.
Yeah.
But it is underlined by belief. The same way that we all believe that gold has value. Gold's value doesn't really come from its industrial uses. Yes, people use it in jewelry, but the vast majority of if you just looked at all the industrial applications and jewelry applications of gold, and you did all of the financial calculations, gold would be worth much less than it actually is. Where gold derives most of its value is people just hoarding it in vaults, right? So it is its people's belief in gold that really gives gold its value. So people already understand the same concepts. They just really like what they can see and touch, and they have a very difficult time with what they can't see and touch. But we're all online all the time. We know how much easier it is. Anyone who has used crypto knows how much easier it is to send crypto than a bar of gold, right? So much easier. right? Like you have to pay somebody with a machine gun to go and truck this thing over. And can you imagine?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
I can't remember last
internet.
time I bought something with a gold bar.
Exactly. So we already understand this concept of like, I put in my credit card details and I know that there aren't like pieces of paper flying to the, to Amazon that I just bought this thing for. Like we already understand the concept of digital money. I just feel like when it comes to store of value, people have a very difficult time putting it in something that they can't see and touch. But what I would recommend is understanding people's belief in it, everyone talking about it, the fact that there's conferences for frickin' Bitcoin, that there are, millions and millions of people who hold it and refuse to sell it, even though the price is so high. That is what backs the value. It is the belief, right? And so, I hope that gives some clarity.
Don't stop believing.
Truly. Well, you know what happens when people stop believing is the bubble bursts, right? And that happens all the time, right? In economies, bubbles burst, they get created. People lose confidence in, like, think about the Zimbabwean dollar, right? 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars is on the order of cents, right? And so ultimately, like, all of this is about collective belief, and people can just decide they want to stop believing in something. And that's like the price of a company's stock just plummeting, right? That people have lost belief, right?
So will you say in some sense what would strengthen also Bitcoin is exactly how it's used in these kind of constructive, for example, DeSci projects, because that is something that would affirm the value or the value belief.
I would say it would make it more valuable, but it's not necessary. All you need is the belief that something has value for it to have value.
I'm
Right.
just thinking that it
And-
would strengthen that belief, that there are all
Absolutely.
these positive
100%.
applications.
If there are people who will accept it as a form of payment for their energy, then it adds to the belief, because you are trading, my brain power or your brain power for this new currency that we've just decided is valuable. Absolutely. Like that is what underlies the value for sure. It's part of this belief, right? It's just, one instance of somebody believing that it has value, to where, okay, I'm willing to do work for you, but I don't want dollars. I want Bitcoin, or I want Solana, right? So that is in and of itself a form of belief. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. What up, Linus?
Welcome, Linus.
Hi, super nice to see you guys.
Great to see you, bro.
We're still on the tutorial of what the hell a Bitcoin is, so we have a long way to go.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Super nice to see you
Yeah,
guys.
I have no idea about this,
No.
how to handle this format now. But I'm thinking that we're going to keep talking with Benji for a while, and we're going to ask him to show us the Pump Science website and go through that. And I think Linus, if you want to jump in to say something, that's perfectly fine. Do it. But we'll probably ask you more questions a little bit later. Okay? So don't feel left
Sounds
out
good.
now for a while. Is that okay for you?
That sounds great.
Perfect. Benji, maybe we should do a little bit of glossary here. So we mentioned a few different concepts: tokens, smart contracts. Maybe we have the concept of non-fungible token as well. Maybe just a short tour through those concepts to give us a grounding.
Do you mind if we go one by one? What was the first one you asked about?
Yeah, so token is often used interchangeably with crypto, but it's not exactly the same thing, right?
I would just, the easiest way to think about a token is just as a new currency. So I think we all understand, like, you go to a country, they have a currency. That's how they, engage in commerce, right? That's their citizens' way of storing value, exchanging value for goods, etc. A new token is just like a new currency. But here, instead of the countries being physical land masses, you can think of them as like internet native, right? So it's just like a group of people who live online who all believe that this one thing, this one new digital currency has value, right? So that's kind of what a token is. It's just a new currency, right? But it's of course just digital. It's not issued by a government. It's issued by code, right? And each piece of code can be different. So the way that different tokens can be engineered is all completely different, and that's what people are experimenting around. There's almost experimentation around money now, of like people trying to create new forms that they think are better than the last one, right? And everyone's just trying to compete to be money. So it's like they want to be the next what is perceived and believed to be the best form of money, right? Because again, it all comes back to belief. So that's what a token is. A smart contract is basically a piece of code that determines who gets what, tokens under what conditions, right? So the very simple one is like a borrow or a lend smart contract. So, Patrick wants to borrow, 50 ETH from Peter. And so he takes Bitcoin and he puts that in a contract. And so long as the value of that Bitcoin is worth more than the value of ETH that Peter's borrowing, then Peter gets to borrow. But as soon as the price of ETH starts going up relative to Bitcoin, his collateral that he's left with Patrick has gone down, and the value of what he's borrowed has gone up. And so there's a contract that says, okay, actually, at a certain point, we're going to take Peter's Bitcoin and we're going to give it to Patrick, because they can't trust each other. They don't know each other. They're on different parts of the planet. Patrick can't go and call the collections agency and collect the money from Peter if anything goes wrong. So we're just going to have code do it.
So it's a rule system.
It's a rule system. Exactly. It's the rules, legal, right? It's all the same. It's like, what are the rules of the game?
Yeah.
Totally. And it's codifying that into software. So that's what a smart contract is. I think your next question was around.
Yeah, I mean, non-fungible tokens is so interesting to me because a couple of years ago there was this crazy hype around NFTs and people were selling, I don't know, I think even Donald Trump was selling some crazy superhero cards with himself or something like that. And my day job is as a tech reporter at Ny Teknik, is a tech outlet in Sweden. And so I've been writing a little bit about crypto, a little bit about blockchain, and I did cover a little bit about NFTs at the time. And it always felt to me that this, like most things in crypto, it felt like this is actually kind of brilliant, but it doesn't seem like people are using it the right way, or maybe, we could talk about belief again, of course. If people believe in it, fine, there can be belief in anything, but it just felt to me that there's something more here. And then, the broad media outlets just stopped covering it. It wasn't interesting anymore, but it lived on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what NFT stands for is non-fungible token. What it means in reality is typically there's only one of something or a limited supply of something. So going back to Patrick and I's conversation about scarcity, is it's programmed scarcity of a certain item. So like there's only one person who can hold the title to your house, right? So that is in the physical world, there's a piece of paper called the title to your house, right? And that, if you wanted to represent it digitally, would ideally be represented as one of these non-fungible tokens. So there's only one of them that can be created. It represents this contract between, you and the state, right? The state says, we will protect your ownership of this house. And if someone tries to steal your house, we will, throw them in jail and give it back to you. So that's the legal contract.
Can I ask you, how is it different from double spending? Because for an untrained mind, it seems like you've already kind of solved the problem. So it must be some difference.
Yeah, so typically when you say double spend, you are referring to a fungible token. right? Like BTC,
Yeah.
right? The Bitcoins, right? So those are fungible tokens. And so you're 100% right that the concepts are completely analogous, but it just has to do with a fungible token like Bitcoin, of which there are many. There's 21 million Bitcoins,
Right.
and they're all identical with each other, right? You can replace one with
So
another.
in theory, if there was one Bitcoin in the world, that could be a non-fungible token.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And also, they're like the same way we think of coins, right? In the sense that it's physical and you can't cut it in half, and then that would be like 50% ownership. The thing with the non-fungible tokens is there's typically a discrete number of them. So there's one. You can't have half an NFT. Like you can have one or zero, right? So you don't have half the deed to your house, right? You either have the deed to your house or you don't have the deed to your house, right? And so it's a bit more nuanced, but it is the exact same concepts that you're talking about of just like you create these digital entities. We call them tokens. They can be fungible. They can be non-fungible. They can represent different things, and they can be interchangeable based on different rules. We are just literally recreating the rule system that we have in the real world, but we're creating it digitally.
Perfect. So and then came these because Molecule is like the technological infrastructure platform for all of these decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs that have come after, right? We have the Vita DAO and Cryo DAO and a lot of DAOs just in the longevity space. So what is a DAO here?
Yeah, so I think maybe to analogize a bit here, typically when you have a public company, so like there's a company whose shares are traded on a stock market, each share often represents a voting right in important decisions that are made by the company, right? So if the company wants to fire its CEO, then each share represents a single vote in that decision, right? And so if you have more shares, you have a greater voting power than if you have fewer shares. You have more stake in the game, so to speak, versus less stake in the game. So that's kind of like one frame of thinking here is like all this is doing is rather than those shares being equity in a company, they can just be tokens on a chain, and they don't necessarily have to be, for a for-profit. They can also be for a non-for-profit. And so, if you have a nonprofit that wants to allocate money toward longevity research, you could either, elect a board of people who you consider experts, and they get to decide where all the money goes. Or you could put the voting power in the hands of the donors. And so if you donate more, then you have more, of a decision-making ability into where the money goes. And so that's what tokens are super good for, is like, Patrick has donated $1 million, so he gets 1 million tokens. Peter, doesn't have very much. He only put in $5, he gets 5 tokens, et cetera. So basically it ensures that the voting weight is proportional to stake in the game, right? How much the contribution. So DAOs are just basically doing this with tokens instead of, the legal system, right? It's just all about like digitizing the same concepts that we've already had, but making it so they can be trustless, so that Patrick and Peter don't need to know each other, right? They both are very into longevity research, and they both want to contribute to the field. But, Patrick doesn't really feel comfortable giving $1 million to Peter because he doesn't know him. He doesn't know if he's trustworthy. He could be both of them could be anonymous, right? They might not even know who each other is, where they exist, yada, yada. So what this allows them to do is still to both contribute to longevity research in a completely trustless way.
Yeah. But it's not autonomous, really, is it?
There are different implementations. There are pure DAOs, right, where they both put their money into a contract, and those funds can only be unlocked by code, and that code is determined by voting, right? So there are pure DAOs, but really what you see with DAOs is they're not very decentralized and they're not very autonomous, right? Which is the D and the A, which is you have a few people who basically have all the tokens, and they are executing things manually, right? They're executing decisions manually. So I don't think it's fair to call those DAOs, but rather like in the purest sense of what the DAO is it's basically like it's software that runs an organization, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's just, that's really the way to think about it. Instead of there being like a board of, individuals who are like, what should we do? It's like all the stakeholders who, make proposals, and those proposals get voted on by the same stakeholders. And, those decisions just get executed. Money just gets sent around, and things just get done without necessarily any individuals at the top executing them. DAOs are extremely difficult. They have proven to be very, very hard to coordinate. Getting back into like the mechanism design a bit of like the incentives, it's very difficult to execute on. I think that, the corporate world has been innovating on corporate governance and structure for a very long time. And it has landed on, a company where you have individuals at the top who have the most power because they have the most information and they are the most invested. And so you give them the vast, vast majority of the decision-making power. You don't require them to go through a bureaucracy. You give them agency. You say, you're super motivated. You've, built this baby. This is what you care about. Go do your thing. What we say is let them cook, right? You just let them freaking cook, right? You don't oversee them too much. You don't, but so I think it's my personal belief that system is going to be much more efficient than a DAO, where it's like every single decision has to be voted on by 1,000 people. It just becomes much slower of a moving of an organization, and speed is often the determinant between survival and death of organizations. And so I think optimizing for speed is super important. And so I think the organizations that we're building on Pump Science are much more aligned with like, you give the scientist, like Linus, for example, like complete control. They get to make all the decisions, and we just have people who want to support him. They get to support him. They get to share in whatever value comes out of it, but he's the decision maker, right? So anyway, this is kind of like a different way of looking at on-chain organizations and the voting structure around them and the incentive structure, et cetera. So we're experimenting here, right? Like there is no perfect formula. We're all just trying different things, seeing what works.
Okay, so I'm thinking, Patrick, before we move on, do you have any more foundational questions that you feel like we should go through before we let? I'm thinking after that, I'm going to introduce Linus. And then after I have introduced Linus, I'm going to ask Benji to show us the Pump Science website. Because I can imagine that Linus will be brought up during that presentation, or could be at least. So what do you say, Patrick?
Yeah, say go ahead.
Okay. Linus Petersson, welcome to Levity. You are back. You are actually our first guest who's back on the podcast. You were our very first guest in episode 3 last year. So it's great to have you back. And you are founder of the Swedish Longevity Cluster. You are author. You wrote the book Läkemedel mot åldrande, which is Drugs Against Aging in English. And now you are also, what do you call it in this world? You have launched an intervention on Pump Science. Would you briefly tell us what that is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. I'm super excited. Benji, you're gonna help me out here. What's my title here?
The title is drug dev.
Drug dev.
So
Drug dev.
in biotech, we call them drug developers, right? In the crypto world, they call a token creator a dev, just short for developer. And so we just, kind of combine them and called it a drug dev.
Cool. Awesome. I got a new cool title. I love it.
You're the drug dev now.
Awesome. Yeah, we focused on Metformin, which, anyone interested in longevity is familiar with Metformin, this type 2 diabetes drug. And I think there are a bunch of reasons why Metformin is quite interesting, because it's been used for many, many decades, right? So we have an extensive sort of history of data, and we can tell that the safety profile is very strong. We know the side effects very well, right? And we also can do sort of large-scale studies, look at hundreds of thousands of individuals over decades, and factor out all other components and only isolate the effect of metformin. And when one do this, you actually see an effect in humans. So we can actually extend the healthy part of life, health span, using metformin. Now this is the only drug so far which we can do so for. So I think that in and of itself is super exciting. And another thing to know is that the patent has expired, right? So there's no one holding this patent, and therefore it lends itself excellent for this structure, this decentralized science structure, right? So if we can prove that it extends health span or lifespan, there's no company owning that patent, right? But now that we have this token, which we call BADDY, which is super bad, super cool, if you own that token, you can sort of take part in the value that will be created. And Benji, you can explain like exactly how the mechanism works, but basically when this token is traded, a certain amount of the fee, is a bit like very small fee, is put aside to do research. And we have actually gained a significant amount of research funding here. So I'm super happy about that. We have Vitalik reposting a tweet of mine, and after that it sort of blew up. So I'm super happy about this. I'm very excited. And yeah, Benji, what do you say?
Yeah, no, happy to build off of that. But yeah, so the basic idea is, look, like we want to use these tokens and this whole crypto world and energy that it unlocks to fund more research on these molecules that we know are valuable, or we believe to be valuable, but we want the evidence to support it.
We're going to say now, Benji, sorry for interrupting you, but just we do have this podcast as a audio only. So for the next few minutes, we're going to recommend you to visit us on YouTube if you want to understand more of what we're saying right now, because Benji is demonstrating the Pump Science website here.
Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, no, I'll try and explain what we're looking at, but I think the way you can think about it is what it looks like is kind of a video game, right?
Yeah, and why does it look like a video game?
Because life is a video game to not die, right? And we are just gamifying that. And these are the different tools that could potentially help you extend your life, right? And ultimately, what we're doing with the whole field of longevity is investigating which of these magic molecules can help give us more time, right? And so there are two ways to play. You're either a scientist and you launch a new idea, or you are a trader and you are trading, which compounds you think will be valuable, right? And so what we're doing here is enabling anyone to launch a scientific experiment. So you can click the launch button and you can submit whatever compounds you want to test, right? So, if you want to test metformin, you would type in metformin and then you can launch this. And what would happen then is a token gets created for it. And if there's enough trading on that token, then we'll start to run experiments on it. So let's take a look at Linus's compound, which is metformin. And so I'm opening up the metformin page, and what you'll see is that metformin has a token that has a $15,000 market cap, and it's traded $800 in the last 24 hours by about 250 people, right? And sorry, my computer's a bit slow. But
no problem.
Anyone can buy this token, right? So what you're seeing on the right here is like a trading interface. So if you want to buy tokens in metformin, you can do that over here. What you'll see down here is we've raised $14,000 for research on metformin. And so right now, ongoing, we have we've worm experiments going, fly experiments going, and we also have enough funding to start mouse experiments as well. And so anyway, find this to be super interesting. But this is basically the idea, which is you launch a token, the trading of that token is what funds the research. And so the objective becomes to try and get as much attention on the token as possible so people trade it. and so that you get more research for the token itself. And of course, if ever we are to commercialize metformin, then we would want to reward the token holders with whatever value comes out of the back end. And so I think Linus mentioned this briefly, but what happened here, if you see this giant volatility, is Vitalik reposted one of Linus's tweets. I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was something on the order of like, isn't it crazy that 100,000 people today will die of aging?
Basically,
and Vitalik retweeted this, and he basically said like, one day we'll look at this and think it's barbaric, right? And
was this retweet completely coincidental? Was it a coincidence?
Okay. Yeah, I didn't coordinate anything. I met him in Georgia like 1.5 years ago, and just spoke to him super briefly.
Yeah. So they had met each other. I think Vitalik had no idea what he was getting himself into here. He was just retweeting what he thought was to be an interesting comment by Linus. But we were going to take advantage and channel this attention for research. And so the way we did it is I called Linus and I said, Linus, you have a lot of attention on you right now. You may not know it, but you are viral. And I think he did know it at that point. And so I said, Linus, make the contract address of the token in your bio. Like basically in your Twitter bio, just say like, support metformin research here. Here's the token address. Okay. He did that. And all of a sudden, the token went up 40 times.
Yeah.
40 times. Okay. From a market cap of about $8,000. Sorry, gonna have to go back here. It went from about $10,000 to $430,000, right? In the span of 2 hours. Okay. So this shows how much energy there is in this crypto world to predict attention, and we can channel that attention to funding longevity research by having the trading volume fund the experiments. So this is a very, very important point because it is what I would call like our unique innovation here is we're not crowdfunding, right? Linus doesn't come out and say, hey, I want to go run a mouse experiment on metformin. Give me $20,000, give me $100,000. But rather, there's a trade where Linus is saying, I will get attention to this token, and in exchange, if you trade it, we'll go run experiments on it. So it's a very, very different way to fund research than has been typically tried, which is like, venture capital fund invests into a company, or there's crowdfunding. And this is what like Vitalik was trying, and many of the other DeSci projects it's around crowdfunding. What we're trying to do is channel attention into funding by using the trading fees. So the experiments have not yet completed for metformin, but I'll show you for ones that have.
But Benji, before you do that, I'm just curious because you mentioned that the experiments has not yet been completed. As a person not doing any lab work myself, this sounds like there's a fast turnaround here between actually starting this token and getting experiments running.
Absolutely. And so, we would always like to be faster, right? Never satisfied with the speed. The speed can always be faster, but we are trying to accelerate as much as possible. And the way we've accelerated is by having formalized partnerships with labs where we have the contracts with them in place, we have master services agreements, and we are basically able to send them compounds to test, and they're able to send us data in very standardized ways that allow us to present it in an application like this, where you can expect the data of a certain format and you can visualize it in a certain format. So here, we can basically look at all the experiments that have been run on this combination, which is rapamycin plus SMER2. They're just, two compounds that we're testing for lifespan extension. And what you can see is, this combination of compounds increased the lifespan by 6% in the worms. And now what we're currently doing is running it on flies. And you can see all of the data completely transparently. This is going on in real time. I mean, we're 3 weeks into this fly experiment on this SMR28 rapamycin combo. And right now, the mean life extension is about 4% increased thus far. But this is in progress, right? So this is like watching the game unfold in real time. And we're also racing the flies. So, if I click play, then you'll see basically these flies race. We turn it into an entire game, right? And we're trying to predict which of these compounds will extend lifespan, for which, these races are just basically a surrogate metric of health. If the flies are running faster and farther, then they're likely healthier and they'll likely live longer. And so it's a way, while the experiments are running, to be able to predict, is this compound going to work or not, without having to wait for all the flies to die in order to, understand. So when you think about trading, right, these become indicators that help with trading decisions of, even though we're 3 weeks into the experiments, I can already see that Raptor is faster than control, right? If I look at the data, the flies are clearly running faster in most of the scenarios, and it's hard to say whether they're running further. So, maybe I'll, not wait and see what happens. But if there was a very clear distinction between one another, you'd be able to make a trading decision with much more confidence, right? Because without there being a ton of deaths of flies yet, whether or not the flies are healthier. So it's starting to look at longevity like a sport. Of course, you can imagine all of this be translated not only to mice, but humans as well, right? And so there could be, trials where you have, a certain compound versus a control. Everyone is monitoring their biometric data, all of it's streaming in real time, and everyone's trading, trying to predict which one of these things will work, right? So that's ultimately the sport and the game that we're trying to create, right? Is like real time experimental testing.
Because you when you do, I saw your appearance on Matt Cabeline's podcast. So you talked about how you speed up your test in mice, right? Because it would take a long time to. I mean, they are fast compared to humans, but still, a mouse experiment is several years, right? But you do a surrogate for that.
Yes. So we're doing multiple different experiments on the mice. All of the entire goal is get the most valuable data per unit time and cost, right? So I would say that is our metric. So it's not about getting the perfect data, running the perfect experiment, right? It's very easy to criticize the experiments we're running and say they're underpowered. You should be using a different mouse model. You should be running them for the entire life of the mouse. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to survive, right? And so we need as valuable data as fast as possible because we're dying, right? And so I think that's the lens with which to look at this. It's like as an emergency. Like we need data right now, right? On what works, because I need to make a decision on what I should be taking right now because I don't want to age anymore, right? So it's that kind of urgency that I would suggest people look at the system through. So like, calm right now, but at the end of the day, if you look at like this is as death is an emergency, right? Then we need to figure out what works right now. And so you run the most efficient experiment as you possibly can to get some data that is remotely valuable in making decisions. If something is working well, it doesn't matter if you ran it on 20 mice or 200 mice, you'll get the answer, right? You don't we don't need to like, oh, is it statistically significant? It will be clear, right? If something is working. And our goal is to have enough scale to where we can find those hits, right? Of like what actually is life extending.
So did that value peak in Baddie, did that translate, Linus, to funding for you? And how much? And then like how did that work?
Yeah, it did. We got 14,000. Benji, feel free to explain.
Yeah, no, so I forget exactly how much volume was done, but the way to think about it is the more trading volume there is, we take a 2% fee, 70% of that goes to the research. And so, I think it was something on the order of, maybe like close to $10,000 of funding was acquired from that trading.
Really? Wow.
Yes. So that can fund, several months of mouse studies.
So did some people make a lot of money on this?
Yes. Some people made 40 times their money. Yeah. So the value of the token went from about $10,000 in market cap to about $430,000 in market cap. So some people made 43 times their money.
We don't know how to respond to that.
Come play.
Yeah.
That's the only way to respond.
So speaking of that, how do you play? I mean, let's say you have never touched a wallet, you don't know even how to begin. What do you do? I want to invest in this intervention.
Yeah,
but I have no idea. I've never used crypto.
That's
what do you do?
Totally okay. So what you would first do is you would create an account on an exchange. And when I say exchange, I mean like exchanging, fiat money. So people think this is money, like, euros, the Swiss francs. What's is Sweden, is the euro? Sorry, I'm so ignorant.
No, we're not in the euro. We have kronor.
Okay.
Crowns, essentially.
Crowns. Apologies. I should have known that. So if you want to exchange crowns for crypto, then you need an account with one of these exchanges. And so Coinbase is a very famous one. Binance is a very famous one. Kraken is a very famous one. These are large exchanges that are basically regulated and enable people to exchange, money as they consider it, like, fiat, crowns, euros, etc., into Solana tokens. So our whole system is run on the Solana blockchain. And so that requires the use of the underlying currency there called SOL. And so you can buy SOL with crowns on one of these centralized exchanges. And then what you would need is a wallet. And so you can think of this as just like a personal wallet. The most popular one on Solana is called Phantom. And so you go to phantom.com, you would download it. It's a browser extension. And so if you don't mind me just sharing my screen really quickly.
Yeah.
So Phantom, so basically these are browser extensions, right? And so I use Chrome. And so you can download Phantom as a browser extension, so that it basically comes with you to whatever website you use. And so I connect mine here. So in the same way that you come to an e-commerce site, let's say like Amazon, or I don't know what popular clothing stores there are in Sweden, but basically people are very used to inputting all their contact information. Here's my name, here's my address, here's my phone number, here's my credit card information. All of that is kind of collapsed into a wallet in crypto. And so all you do is connect your wallet and off you go, right? Like you can use any application. I can transact immediately as long as I connect my wallet. So rather than needing to input all my information, I just connect wallet and now I can start, buying tokens. And so you would take the SOL that you got on a centralized exchange, like, Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, all the ones I mentioned, and you would deposit it onto a Phantom wallet, for which you can get the address. You can do tutorials later. And then I would connect that wallet and then you can buy. So there definitely are a few steps involved. Absolutely. But I think, once people mess around with the tech and, with small amounts of money, you start to become comfortable with it. You start to see the flows of value and understand where things are going. And it becomes very fun, frankly. It becomes very fun.
A lot of these applications have previously been built on Ethereum. Why Solana?
It's a great question. It's the users. There are the most users on the Solana blockchain. And the reason for that is it is the fastest and the cheapest to execute on. So when you use Ethereum, things cost a little bit more, right? The gas fees, the fees that you have to pay to, submit a transaction, right? Which is just like exchange, is higher. And the settlement time, meaning the time between when you click the button and say go and when it finalizes and you get the receipt, right? That's, a few seconds. when you use Solana, it feels like you are using the internet, right? You click buttons and things just happen, right? It's just like almost instantaneous. The block times are 400 milliseconds. It's basically faster than you can even realize, right? By the time you've lifted your finger off the button, it's done, right? And all the transactions are submitted for fractions of a penny. So like, the equivalent in US dollars is like, 0.0001 cents is the cost to submit a transaction. So it's incredibly cheap, right? So what the tech is moving toward is just feeling like the internet, right?
Yeah.
Where everything becomes instantaneous and incredibly cheap to operate. And so I would say like using Solana is much closer to that familiar internet experience that people are used to. And so that has brought a ton of users to the Solana chain and builders. And it's like why we're super excited about building on it. And so if you look at the applications that are being built on Solana, they are making the most money relative to these other chains. It's because it's where the users are trading. It's where, there's the most opportunity, so to speak. And it's a technology competition, right? Like everyone is trying to build the most efficient, secure, protocol. And it is of our belief that Solana is currently winning. So that's why we built on it. It could change.
What you have shown here, right? It's the only one in the world, right?
For what?
For what you're doing with the trade and the science, etc.
Isn't that cool though? Like it's just there's so much white space that can just be the only one in the world. Like there's no competition. Like N of one. I mean, I think that what happens is when a business model proves itself, then a lot of people pile on. But no one has proven that this can work, right? And shown that you can make a sustainable business in this field, right? In this application. And so I don't think that's why there's very much competition, because it's crazy. Because every time I come home, my parents are like, when are you going to get a real job? Like, right? Because it's so risky. We don't know that this is going to work. This is complete unknown, but we're going to try.
Well, you already provided support for Linus's project.
Totally. And like, it's those little additions of value that we hope to scale and, help many scientists and many, longevity enthusiasts, connect as many as possible and make as many of these transactions, these productive transactions as possible, fund as much research, come up with as many longevity products as we can. The greater the scale, the greater the probability of survival and success. So, yes, I think what we've done with Linus is awesome. It's great. It's not enough for us to like say we've won and call it a day. Like this has to be a repeatable thing where we're doing this constantly at scale for it to work.
Can I ask, what's the idea of the design of the web page, the way it looks?
The design or the sign, like the logo?
No, I was more thinking of just the design of how it looks, the vibe.
Yeah, so the original goal was to feel like a retro video game. So like, a game from the, late 80s or early 90s, Space Invaders. There's a very popular worm game that's old. It was like Nintendo 64 called Worms Armageddon. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar. You're familiar?
Oh yeah, sure. I used to be a video game reporter in my earlier life, so I actually downloaded Worms to show my daughter. She didn't understand the brilliance of it, so, I don't know I don't know how to handle that really. But we used to play it a lot in the early 90s or so.
Amazing. Yeah. So the first experiment we run on the compounds is on worms. It's on C. elegans. And so the idea was we would kind of like model that off of Worms Armageddon. And so that was honestly the original thinking. It wasn't, much more thoughtful than that. A lot of crypto users are, gamers, I would say, right? And so they like video games. This is just a new video game where, instead of like a random score that's for, ego, like there's actually money involved, right? And so that's a big way to think about crypto is it's like a video game where there's money involved. And so I think that that's the crowd we wanted to appeal to. We totally understand that this design system does not apply and attract everybody, but it seems to attract the users that trade, right? And so that's who we're really appealing to. Those are the people that fuel this whole system, is the traders, right? There are way more scientists than there are people willing to fund those scientists, right? Just going back to supply and demand, there's much more supply than demand. And so we have to appeal to the demand more closely.
How big is your team? Was there a big discussion about this old school video game layout?
I mean, it's a continuous conversation, frankly. The team is small. The team is 2 full-time, and we have 4 part-time. We have 1 designer and 3 engineers that are all 50%. So it's very small.
I was thinking it would feed into the idea of making funding science fun.
Exactly, putting the fun in funding. But yeah, no, so I would say, like, with all these decisions, it's certainly collaborative, but we're a pretty small team. So there's only so many, people with ideas, right? But yeah,
Are there any numbers you can share with us, like milestones you're happy to have achieved, like number of compounds and stuff like this?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you asking. It's been about 110 compounds that have launched. We just had our first product that was launched yesterday. So what I mean by product is it's a homeopathic medicine that's on the market. You can go to bluescorpion.com and order it tomorrow. And we're going to test that directly on humans. So we're going to run a human study on that. So that's our first product. That was a big milestone achieved yesterday. The token's called Venom. And yeah, it's not so much for longevity as much as it is for, like, pain and inflammation, and whatever the association there is between, pain, inflammation, and longevity. I'm sure there's a connection there, but our goal is to start launching products as well, and to just, go straight to humans and study, run human trials basically on as many products as people are interested in running. So, we want to make new discoveries, but we also want to validate existing products as well. Both are valuable data sets to produce for, longevity enthusiasts. So that was a very cool milestone. First product live and trading. And then we have 110 or so compounds that have been launched. And in total, we've done about like $25 million in volume, of trading volume, from about 13,000 traders. And we're approaching $1 million in funding raised, just from all the fees that have been generated. So we're still really small. This is still extremely early. And the numbers aren't anything to, get excited about yet, but there are hints that this could work, and enough hints for us to keep going.
Talking of clinical trials, are you connected with network states in any way? I mean, we met in Susalu.
Somewhat. I would say, like, there are a few longevity network states. There's one in SF. There's one in Honduras. There's a few of them. Those are fantastic in terms of, like, being the frontier of where we could recruit participants from, etc. They're still small, and so the total addressable market of the network states is still incredibly small. The group that we're working with to run the human studies thus far, they have thousands of biohackers that are all over the world that have their app, that are, ready to test new products and measure themselves and get the products for free. And, they get, like, gift cards basically for participation and free product if they adhere to the protocol. But if you limit yourself to network states, then it's just, only have so many participants. But if you go worldwide, then there isn't that limitation. But I guess you could consider these groups of biohackers to be its own network state that you're forming, right? And so I find that to be super exciting.
Still, I could see there could be a good synergy here.
Absolutely. No. I totally hear you. And, that book, Biology, is certainly, like, transformational, at least for me personally. I don't know if you've actually read his book.
No.
On network states. Yeah. Highly recommend. definitely one to consider.
He should be on a podcast soon.
Absolutely.
We had our first book recommendation now. You'll have more book recommendations later, Benji.
Oh my God, would love to. Would love to.
Linus, what's your? I mean, how does this continue for a dev that has started testing an intervention through Pump Science? How will your life change now, Linus?
Well, I'm super excited, and I was really pumped up, Pump Science. When this happened this week, I was driving home, and my phone sort of exploded. Benji calling me, I'm like, okay, let's do this, and if I personally were to sort of accumulate, $14,000, that would take a while, and for me to actually do that, to commit. I think it would take a very long time, right? Because you want to go on holiday and stuff before, right? So I think this is very, very exciting, and I think what's the most exciting thing is the potential. I mean, if this super great platform can be developed even further to become super user friendly, and we can sort of have proof of concept, we have the whole chain, from launching a compound to doing maybe even human studies and having good results. And everything is in place, and then we will have this sort of, I don't know, Elon Musk, retweeting something, and then we're off to the races, generating, 10 million for
yes, Linus. Yes.
That's where we want to be.
You get it. This is the arena, ideally, right? Where we're all just paying attention to and betting around and participating in. And now we just need more ideas, more scientists, more traders, just grow the thing that already exists, right? We have the base layer, just need to build it up and grow the network, right? It is a network state. It is a social network, whatever you want to call it. It's a network of longevity enthusiasts who, subscribe to this don't die idea. I think, I find absolutely fascinating the community that Brian Johnson has built, but I've asked him this question a few times. Why aren't you getting other people involved? And his answer to me has always been, because no one is as disciplined or well off as I am, so they can't participate in the studies. And I just don't take that for an answer. I don't think that that's the optimal state. I think that we can leverage others and their, bodies and their resources to make new discoveries. We don't just need one N of one going, to make all the discoveries that we need to make. There's too many things to test, right? There just is not enough time to test everything. We need to parallelize this discovery process. And I just think that will come from, getting more people involved. He doesn't think so, but we can agree to disagree.
The interventions that you have launched, are those mostly coming as ideas from scientists in academia, or how does that work?
There doesn't really seem to be a pattern, frankly, of where the best ideas are coming from. It's really all over the place. I would say it's a lot of independent scientists, frankly, people that are trained, in biotech, in gerontology, whatever. Maybe they're affiliated with a company, maybe they're not. And, they're just very excited about longevity research, and they don't really have a good avenue to do testing, right? Or the resources to do it. And so this just becomes the way for them to get involved, right? And so, but no, I don't think that there's one phenotype that's working. I actually thought that there would be a lot more traction with PhD students. There's not that much. I would say we have way more independent scientists that are participating than grad students. This is shocking to me. We thought when we started this, oh my God, the grad students who are just so underpaid and have all these ideas and can only test so many because of what they can get funded, that they would love this. But I don't know, for whatever reason, they aren't super excited about this. It's really once they graduate, that they seem to be much more interested in getting involved. So,
Benji, you should probably talk to the student longevity organizations that are out there. I know Andrea Olson, if you know her, she kicked one off at Caltech, and I'm giving lectures here locally. I should probably engage that crowd. Those are young and up and coming.
Frankly, we've emailed so many, we've tried to get as many in front of as many as possible. We got in front of Brian Kennedy's lab, got to present to his lab meeting, and got one of his grad students involved, who's now like very, very involved, which is great. But it's really kind of like an isolated case. Have emailed more aging clubs and longevity clubs at universities than you can imagine. Oxford, Cambridge, all of Europe, all of the US. I've reached out to all of them. Very little response. Much, very surprising to us, frankly. But maybe it's how we're pitching ourselves. Maybe it's the channel. There's so many reasons why it could not be landing, but we've not cracked the code there yet.
Right. If I were to guess, I'm thinking, everybody's like crypto and they're associated with like scam, and it's like they don't really understand it. Probably that's the hurdle. I mean, if they really understood this model, I think the interest would explode, right?
Yeah, we don't even lead with crypto. In fact, we hide that away. We wait until they demonstrate interest. We say we can just get your research funded. We can bring you free experiments. All you have to do is give us your ideas. Or, all you have to do is launch your ideas. And still, yeah, anyway. But I think you're right. I think people are sniffing out the crypto. They're skeptical of that. They think it's associated with scams. And it turns them off, as far as I can tell.
I think if you can go on Matt Cabeline's podcast and come away unscathed as you did, that's that's a pretty big proof that this is legit, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's still very skeptical, though, for the record. Like, I think he was very, very forthcoming during our podcast together, but he's still very skeptical of this whole system. And rightly so. I think good scientists should be skeptical, but I think there's a balance between skepticism and optimism. And, we all can agree that the previous system that we're all operating in is not exactly working. And so isn't it worth trying and experimenting on the scientific system itself, how we do science, how we fund it, as much as it is to experiment, in the lab, right? Like, to us, like, this is the new lab of how do we design all the incentives to fund as much valuable research as possible versus, in addition to experimenting, in animals, right, on the different compounds.
Well, if we always listened to skeptics, we would live in caves.
Exactly.
Here.
You can always come up with reasons not to do something.
Who is the leader of the pack so far?
It's a great question. So if you go to pump.science and you look at the top, I can show you. So we have basically, the game is to extend life the most in the animals, right? Like, that is the objective.
Yeah.
Right? Ultimately, we want to do that in humans, but we have to test on the animals first. And so we call them the kings of the pill instead of kings of the hill, right? And so the king of the pill in C. elegans is doxycycline, which has extended their lifespan by 80%. The king of the pill in flies is urolithin A, which extended their lifespan by 20%. So at any point, a new compound can come and dethrone the previous king. Doxycycline replaced omeprazole, which was submitted by CRISPR copy, and that replaced rapamycin, which was the previous king of the pill, and that replaced rifampicin, right? So it's just like this, crown that keeps, exchanging heads, so to speak, of, whoever comes up with the idea that works the best. And so our objective is to reward those who find the most potent, the best longevity compound, so to speak. And so whoever holds the tokens in the Kings of the Pill gets airdrops, basically gets free tokens of the new compounds that launch. So if I launch a new compound today, then some of those tokens will go to the holders of doxycycline and some will go to the holders of urolithin A. And that is our way of rewarding those who believed in those compounds early, right? And supported the research to get done that was productive in our sense, meaning it was the winner. It was the top performer.
Yeah.
So what we are developing right now as well, it's not live yet, but we do have a prototype up, is a longevity leaderboard, right? So based on all of the experiments that have been done, which one makes flies live the longest and in what order? And so urolithin A is the top performer, followed by artemisinin, followed by rapamycin, et cetera, right? So our goal is to make this leaderboard, which is it doesn't really exist yet, right? And this is what we're super excited about, is, having a single place where people can go to for, like the truth about what extends lifespan. I mean, you have like the drug age database, which is probably the closest comparable to this. But even so, it's not run on the same assays at the same labs, right? It's various different labs who have run various different experiments, and they're trying to coalesce all the data. The problem is in science, you call them batch effects, right? What works at one place, is going to work very differently at a different place. And, how do you know that the data is accurate? It's all being run by PhD students who want to graduate, right? So the incentives are a bit weird. And so by having neutral labs who are not accountable to a specific outcome, but are rather accountable to finding the truth and being the most objective lab as possible, that is how we've constructed the system. And now what you can do is have apples to apples comparisons of what works better than something else. And so that's why we're really excited about this system, is you can actually start to create leaderboards, right? Not just like amorphous bodies of evidence, right?
Let's say that we have very good data on some intervention, as you already do, and let's say we actually think that this might be effective, or we want to try the efficacy in humans. Then we have the whole clinical trials paradigm to go through. How do you view that?
It depends on how the compound is designated, right? So if it is a drug, then, it's very different regulations that need to be followed than if it is, approved as a dietary or food ingredient, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, but let's say it's a drug.
Let's say it's a drug, then there are, mechanisms to run clinical studies. There needs to be an IRB. There needs to be physicians overseeing. There needs to be like a principal investigator. It's not rocket science. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's totally doable. And so we have a partner that can run drug trials for us.
So you see that in the future, this might actually advance to clinical trials.
As it should. Ultimately, like if you think about this as a game, humans are the final boss.
Yeah.
So you don't win the game unless you can extend life in humans. So that's what we want to test. Of course, we won't be able to test proper lifespan, but we can look at the best, longevity surrogates. And so we have a lot in mind. Everyone's constantly debating which are the best ones. Longevity biomarkers is like a whole freaking debate in and of itself. But we'll collect as valuable data as we possibly can to get the best answers we can. We're trying to be very practical about this. But to answer your question, yes, we would like to do clinical trials. What is interesting is that the trials are very different if you are going for claims about lifespan extension or longevity than they are if you're trying to cure a disease. So the burden is actually much higher if you're trying to treat a disease, and the trials you need to run, et cetera, versus if you're just trying to be a new dietary ingredient or food ingredient, right? The human trials that you need to run to prove, to make claims is actually much lower. So you don't need to run like phase 1 or phase 2, phase 3 trials. You can just run, basically human studies as safety evidence. And at least in the US, it's a bit more difficult in Europe. But you can basically get dietary ingredients and food ingredients approved much, much more easily than drugs. And so because we're not treating a disease here, or that's not the objective, right? The objective is to improve health. The cost and logistics around getting them approved and commercialized is it's a much lower burden.
Cool. My friends, I gotta leave you. This has been super exciting.
Thank you, Linus. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Super happy to be here, and this will continue. I promise that.
Yeah.
Amazing. You're the best. You're the friggin' best. We'll talk soon, bro.
Will do.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Patrick, is there anything more that you would like to know before we go on to book recommendations?
Yeah, we can go to book recommendations for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Before we do that, Benji, is there anything more you'd like to say that we haven't touched upon that you think, like, why haven't we talked about this?
I think it's more just like the call to action of, again, like coming back to our point about skepticism versus optimism. It's very easy to be skeptical and justify reasons not to do things. But that's not where opportunity and excitement lie, right? The opportunity and excitement lie in taking risks and making mistakes, but moving the field forward, right? Like that's how science moves forward, right? And I think the same just goes for this whole crypto world, which like I'm the first person to understand how many people are skeptical of this system because of the actors that have come before us who have not necessarily given the space a good name, right? And, the same way that the first use cases of the internet were not exactly glorious, to say the least, so too are the first use cases of crypto not exactly glorious, right? It's a lot of gambling, it's a lot of scamming, but that should not basically cloud the opportunity that exists within this super powerful technology. I think it should only, just be precautionary, right? That's, there are lots of bad actors, that there are lots of scammers, but it doesn't mean that everybody is, and that therefore the technology is not worth looking at and using and testing out and paying attention to and getting involved with. Yeah,
that's always been my belief in this technology too, that the technology is there, it's the opportunities are amazing, but you can misuse it like you can with every technology.
Every powerful technology can be misused. I think that's the key.
Okay, Benji, you mentioned one book. You mentioned Network State by Balaji.
Somebody else did. I think it was you, Patrick. But happy to get on that train. So yeah, the Network State book is super interesting. It's written by Balaji Srinivasan. He is, one of these entrepreneurial philosophers that I think is, super interesting to follow. Is an incredibly independent thinker and is super wise. And he wrote a book called The Network State, and it is about the future of countries and how nations are a combination of things that can be broken down. A nation is a piece of land. It is a group of people with an ethnicity. So, like a race, that's one way to measure a country. Another is its culture. So like the types of food people eat, the religions that people follow, right? Like you can kind of break down what a country is. Another thing is a currency. They have a shared way of exchanging value, right? And what he's observing and like the direction that we're moving in is that we're all spending more time online, and we're all, in the digital world, actually much more than we're in the physical world, right? And so the opportunity for nations to exist completely digitally is growing, right? It's not to say that it's coming tomorrow, but it's saying that is, a very interesting thing to pay attention to, is the growth of internet native nations. And that's what Network States is all about. And anyway, definitely worth reading. Don't want to give away too much, but super interesting concept. Should we do more books that have been like transformational?
If you want.
Another really good one is called The Sovereign Individual. It is a book from like early 2000s where they predicted Bitcoin, a decade before it existed, of just basically like, what does it mean to be fully sovereign, like to own your own, to have complete freedom in the world. And one of them is to be able to transact with anyone under any circumstances anonymously on your own terms. And it's a super interesting book. It goes through the history of money and it kind of paved the way for philosophically, like for Bitcoin to emerge, and predicted it. And they called it eCash, I think, because it didn't exist yet. But super interesting book. Another's called The Unincorporated Man. This is a sci-fi novel. I didn't used to like sci-fi. I've grown to love it. And The Unincorporated Man is certainly one of the top sci-fi books. I also found out recently it is Palmer Luckey's favorite book. Palmer
Oh,
Luckey is the founder of Anduril. Anduril is like one of the top defense technology companies in the US now. And yeah, I don't want to give away too much, but the basic concept here is in the future, every single person will be tokenized. What that means is, your income, like basically the same way that you have companies that have shares that trade on, the markets, and people trade, like the share prices, and, think a company is going to go, the value is going to go up or down, based on, how the business is doing and the projections. But imagine that on the individual level. So every single individual has their own share that, trades on the open market. And like, if this kid's doing well in school, maybe I'll buy his stock, right? And universities, rather than charging you tuition, they take equity in you. Governments, they don't charge you taxes, they take equity in you, right? And so the argument I think of this book is this is the most efficient way to do commerce, is every single person is incorporated and has their own shares trading on the open market. Absolutely fascinating book. So the basic idea is the main character is a billionaire from our time, and he freezes himself and he wakes up in the future, and he's not incorporated, but he's billionaire. So, super well off, doesn't need the money. And so what do you do with this person in a world constructed around, people exchanging value in each other? Super fascinating. Definitely changes the way I think you think about this whole world of crypto, because it is the most efficient way to trade all these shares and all these different people. Absolutely fascinating book. Highly, highly, highly recommend. God, there's so many.
yeah,
I'd say
but
like maybe on the more
yeah,
like self-help side of things, like psychology, maybe, frame of seeing the world. There's an incredible book called The Untethered Soul. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's just basically the idea of kind of like surrendering to the world and, not demanding too much of it, not letting it take advantage of you, but realizing that real magic happens where what you want from the world, where what you want from the world and what the world wants from you meet, right? Like that's where real magic happens, and just kind of like surrendering to that and really listening to what the world is trying to tell you, not overanalyzing it, but just like trying to see the signals of like what does the world want from you and following that. It's this whole principle of like really surrendering and not denying or like blocking out what the world is trying to tell you, and being so stubborn that you have to just keep trying things that are failing, but rather surrendering to what the world is trying to tell you and just listening. So anyway, explain that super poorly, but it's a great book.
no, you're doing a great job explaining it, and these are all books that I'm eager to read, actually. So thank you for that. And Benji, thank you so much for coming on our show today. You're doing unique work, fantastic, important work, and we're so happy to be partnering with Pump Science as well, to collaborate together.
Absolutely. Big things coming.
Thank you so much,
Very,
Benji.
very excited. No, thank you for having me.